Good afternoon. It's Friday the 13th of November 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And we'll just get straight on with testing. Now, the Mail was pushing this out this morning. This is a typical headline in the press today. Christmas could be cancelled in Europe. Ireland and France warn their population that there may be travel restrictions during festive period and not to plan on returning home. So the Irish Prime Minister, for example, Leo Varadkar, said it's too soon to book flights home, and their chief medical advisor or chief medical officer has advised against travel. So nobody really knows what's going on. Of course, what these types of headlines are doing, Patrick, is to drive demands for some kind of solution. The immediate solution is going to be mass testing, quickly followed up with vaccines. And of course, we know that the Pfizer vaccine we're going to begin to roll that out at the beginning of December, but there's going to be 10 million doses for 70 million people. Well, got to 70 million people in the country, so clearly there's going to be some people are going to get it first. They're attempting to drive demand. We need it first, this sort of thing. So it's all about managing behaviours, managing demand for a product. But we received this morning. Now it's unconfirmed, so I'm going to ask for anybody that perhaps knows a little more about it to let us know what they know. And it said this. Thanks very much for the person that sent this to us. Says, I have first-hand knowledge that the Cabinet Office Priority Resourcing Team is urgently approaching every government department to request temporary loan of senior management grade staff to draft and brief strategy and policy on a mass COVID testing programme beginning in October. They want the staff to start with immediate effect. Now, this isn't uncommon that senior management grade staff would be taken from one government department to another to fill a particular role for a particular purpose. So I'm going to say it seems to be correct and no reason to doubt it. But of course, we do have plenty of reason to doubt any kind of mass testing programme. And actually, Elon Musk has weighed into this debate at the moment this morning with this tweet: something extremely bogus is going on. We tested for COVID 4 times today. 2 tests came back negative, 2 tests came back positive, same machine, same test, same nurse. And this was the rapid antigen test from BD. And of course, rapid antigen tests are pretty much what is intended for a mass testing program in the UK. Rapid antigen tests, it's debatable whether, in fact, strongly debatable whether they're more reliable than PCR tests. The evidence seems to suggest they're less reliable. And of course, testing is what is driving the current lockdowns and the threats that we are not going to be allowed to travel home for Christmas.
Yeah, the rapid antigen test is meant to be this kind of miracle test that's going to sort of solve all the problems in terms of mass testing, but it's not a diagnostic test. It can't be used as a clinical or medical diagnostic test. It just can't. Neither can the PCR. So what they'll do is they'll be pushing the antigen test as sort of an upgrade to the PCR. It's faster. They'll say it's more accurate. They'll say it's more reliable. But a lot of these claims are completely inflated. And just expect government ministers and public health officials to be sort of shoving this down the public's throat as a solution. So all mass testing is doing is creating tons and tons of data that is absolutely worthless data. It's junk data. It's just stovepiping the system with just more and more data, and really has nothing to do with the actual progress of the virus, or it doesn't show anything in terms of the level of a real pandemic at all. Zero.
Well, let's look, because we didn't do this on Wednesday, but let's look at the latest excess mortality statistics from the Office for National Statistics and look at where we are with that. So the red line, as you will remember, is the all-cause mortality. That's everything. The orange line is the 5-year average. And we'll just remind you, of course, that week 13 was lockdown. That created lockdown deaths. But if you look at the right-hand side there, we start to see some small amount of excess mortality creeping in, Patrick. Now, this is the statistics up to week 44, which is the end of October. But if we look here at when lockdown was brought in before, the claim from the government was that we had this kind of trend in COVID-19 deaths. Now, we I believe, has pretty much established that those were more lockdown deaths than COVID deaths for sure. But nonetheless, you see the trend that started to develop, a very rapid increase in all-cause mortality as lockdown was introduced. So if we compare that to what's going on here at the end of the graph as we come up to date, we're not seeing anything like the same rate of growth in terms of deaths, in terms of excess mortality yet. So let's, as we have done before, drill down and look at where this excess mortality is. Now, for week 44, hospitals are starting to show a little bit of excess mortality according to the ONS statistics. Care homes are still not showing any excess mortality, still below the 5-year average. Private homes, we're dying in our homes in a very strongly excess way, but in other locations not. So again, a little bit of excess mortality apparently creeping into the hospitals, but by far the biggest tranche of excess mortality is in our homes. And our argument here is that this is because people are not getting the medical care that they should be getting, because the NHS for this winter is once again, despite the denials by the NHS and by government, is once again oriented to COVID and to nothing else. And in fact, more and more headlines coming out. So this is the BBC from Wednesday afternoon, I think it was. Newspaper headlines: NHS vaccine vow and GP services to be cut. So this was the announcement that GPs were saying that they were going to restrict access to normal day-to-day GP services in order to manage the forthcoming vaccine rollout. And you know, Patrick, it has to be said, the evidence is clear that in the spring, the reorientation of the NHS and the withdrawal of medical support to care homes and the throwing people out of hospitals for conditions which were not COVID related absolutely caused a large proportion, if not all, the excess mortality in that April to June period. And here we are, the same narrative is being sold to us, the same policy is being implemented. What results are we going to see?
And also, you cannot discount the impact of Project Fear on the public. When you're talking about this, when you're talking about people not getting the care that they need, or the NHS restricting services, or even implying that services are more sort of urgent because of COVID, you can't discount the impact on the public in terms of not taking up or being able to navigate through the new COVID-only NHS service. And the other thing that's totally disingenuous, that's being done by the media, that's being done by politicians, is they're keeping the taxi meter running on this. They're quoting death figures like 50,000. I saw John McDonald, MP, just did this a couple of days ago. 50,000 deaths, and we need to do this, that, and the other. First of all, the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine has already shaved that by up to 33%, just by looking at the death certificates in terms of attributing actual deaths to COVID. So you can cut that 50,000 in a third, and you can cut it off at the last season, because coronaviruses don't run like a taxi meter constantly, okay, to infinity. This is what they're doing. They're seasonal. You cut it off, this is a new season, okay? But they're doing this in America, they're doing it in the UK. Governments and political opportunists and public health officials are milking this sacred death total for all it's worth, and they'll just keep doing it. They'll have a 3-year running total, and they'll be quoting it and having, you know, it's like 9/11 anniversaries, you know, having memorials every 6 months. We've just reached this 1 million global deaths, 1.5 million global deaths, 100,000 COVID deaths. They'll be saying that in 2022 in the UK. It's ridiculous. That on its face is a complete fraud. Okay, and I think people in the media need to be more responsible, and they need to call this out, and they need to push back, because this is pure propaganda. They're totally misappropriating statistics, and they're totally distorting the actual picture that the public should be looking at.
So the Samaritans has been tweeting out this report that they published a couple of days ago. This is their response to the National Confidential Inquiry's figures on suspected suicides during the lockdown. Well, what did they have to say? They said that suicide is a tragedy that devastates friends, families, and communities, while the data published by the National Confidential Inquiry indicates that suicide rates during lockdown in England have not been impacted in the way that many of us were concerned about. We must not be complacent. Suicide is a major public health issue, and this data does not indicate that the trend we have seen over the last 2 years is unlikely to have reversed. And the trend over the last 2 years is very much upwards. So this was the report. And of course, this report, Patrick, produced results in terms of tweets from the likes of Nadine Dorries a few days ago. She got quite hard hit on Twitter for pushing the narrative that she did. But anyway, it says that we examined suicide figures from established real-time surveillance systems in several parts of England. Total population 9 million. That's the population of the real-time surveillance. Comparing the months pre-lockdown, January to March 2020, to post-lockdown, April to August 2020, the average number of suicides per month varied, but there was no evidence of a post-lockdown rise. Now, of course, that period, April until August 2020, isn't really going to give you the reality of post-lockdown suicide, because really it wasn't post-lockdown. Okay, theoretically it was, but businesses were still getting quite a lot of support. People were still on furlough and so on. So the effects of it perhaps haven't followed through yet. So this was the key graph that they published, showing lockdown in March and the restrictions eased at the end of May, June. The population for these findings was 9 million, as I said, and they said that pre-lockdown, the monthly average was 84 suicides amongst that population. Post-lockdown, 85.4, and they're saying that in April to August 2020 there was a 7.3% rise. But this was their key findings, their conclusions at the end. They said they found no evidence of the large national rise in suicide post-lockdown that many feared. They said that there appears to be no rise in suicide post-lockdown, at least in these areas. The higher figures in 2020 should be seen in the context of a rising national rate and maturing real-time surveillance systems. So one of the things they were saying was that the better reporting was part of the reason for the rise in numbers. But they say that there were several important caveats. These are early figures and could change over time, or with the inclusion of more areas. We cannot rule out higher rates in some local areas or population subgroups, especially as the effect of COVID-19 itself has varied between communities. So those are pretty large caveats there. But the thing is, Patrick, that while these statistics are being published, there is so much anecdotal reporting from police, from people in the medical profession. I mean, one person that we know, and thanks for this, had reported to us that a policeman that they know was reporting a suicide a week was what it was before lockdown, and that they're dealing with a suicide a day now. Now, it's not clear to me whether that's an attempted suicide or actually a suicide, but nonetheless, the figures we've seen with COVID-19 aren't necessarily accurate. Timing has a lot to do with it, as with COVID-19, and I think it's maybe too early to be coming to any real conclusions about this, but the headlines have been published, and maybe that's all that's needed.
Well, that's only a segment. 9 million, is that what
Yes.
they're looking at?
Yes.
That doesn't represent what's going on in the country of 65 million
Right.
people. But the worst thing about the line of argument on this, these stories, this headline, and even the line that the Samaritans is taking there on their front page, this is so cynical. You know, they're arguing about statistics, Mike. Okay, they're pushing a quantitative argument back at the public, when you should be looking at a qualitative argument. Look at the incidents themselves. How do they know that even the suicides that they're observing in their surveillance are not caused by lockdown, are not caused by the effects of lockdown? How can you say that locking people up in their homes by destroying the economy, crushing businesses, ruining the education system, ruining young people's futures, their dreams, their hopes, how can you say that this does not affect mental health in an adverse fashion and could be the cause of suicide? To make that argument, I think, is just preposterous what they're trying to do.
Well, yes, I take your criticism of that report. In fairness to the Samaritans, they do make that point, and they suggest that more needs to be done in that area, for sure.
But back to Miss Nadine.
Yes.
She's absolutely trying to deflect this back on the public, saying, "Well, there's nothing to worry about. There's no rise in suicides." This is such a crass and cynical approach by the government. Back in the day, Mike, the government would say, "We are doing all we can and we're going to allocate more resources to this problem." That's how they would answer the public outcry. Now, no. They spin it, they get their spin doctors, they rotate it back and they fire it back at the public and say, "Down your throat with that. Get lost," basically.
Yeah.
We're doing everything perfectly and go away. This is the way the government's behaving right now. It's unbelievable to see ministers doing this right now.
Yes, and well, the question is, would this be considered a suicide in the statistics? This is an absolutely tragic case of a lady in a care home who has refused to take food and medication because she believed that she'd been abandoned by her family because visitors weren't allowed into the care home during lockdown rules. Would this be viewed as a suicide in terms of these statistics? Perhaps not, in which case maybe that needs to be looked at again, because that is totally tragic.
Yeah, luckily she didn't test positive for COVID either. I'm serious.
No, I know you are, I know.
Car accidents, heart attacks, dementia. If you test positive for COVID, you go into that category. It's a separate subject, of course.
Yes. So what's going on with lockdown in the United States then?
Well, the lockdown in the United States. So there's a lot on the ballot, as we talked about in previous programs on Election Edge. We said COVID and lockdown is actually on the ballot, and we weren't kidding. It is on the ballot, although it wasn't sort of made known by the Biden administration or the office of the president-elect. He's already assumed power. Biden's chief advisor, who's going to be his COVID czar, basically, is basically saying 4 to 6 weeks of national lockdown would control the pandemic and revive the economy. So again, locking down, shutting the economy down will save the economy. This is the same ridiculous argument we saw back in the spring. So here is Pandemic Joe, and here is his new COVID czar, who's hoping to assume power in Washington. His name's Mike Osterholm, and he's from the University of Minnesota. And this guy has made an absolute name for himself as a kind of celebrity virologist for years. He's been on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And so when the pandemic made the headlines back in the spring, Osterholm was one of the go-to guys, and he was on the Joe Rogan Show, and he has been peddling absolute lies and propaganda from day one. He was wrong about all of the things he said, like most of these, quote, public health experts, and they just keep shuffling them back in as spokespeople. It doesn't matter if you look back at everything they said. Was, you know, he was down with Neil Ferguson, down with the big death projections, down with the Project Fear and the whole lockdown campaign. And here he is again. So no surprise, he's been selected by Joe Biden. And if you take a look at who he's affiliated with, he is right there in Bill Gates's inner circle, basically. So from Gates to Osterholm, this is from the Minnesota, the Min Post here. The coronavirus was actually expected. So he's right in there with Gates and this whole kind of predictive agenda here with COVID. But I just did a little search here in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Of course, Mike Osterholm from the University of Minnesota. There's a nice little $3.2 million grant there to the University of Minnesota to provide effective, accessible, scalable treatment for COVID-19. This was back in the spring. They didn't waste any time, April 2020. So Bill and Melinda Gates opened up the spigot. Didn't waste any time there. So that's the sort of gravy train, Mike. And Mike Osterholm is one of the worst sort of individuals, I think, who's really cashed in on this pandemic, even though he's been wrong about everything from day one. So he's a real gatekeeper on this topic. So this is what you can expect from the Biden administration: national mask mandates, calling for national lockdowns, circuit breakers, and everything else. All these ridiculous policies. This is what Biden's pushing, Mr. Pandemic. He's the pandemic president. So, New York has instituted a lockdown, and let's just listen to this. This is from Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, talking about how he's going to sort of make this new lockdown in New York this week work.
There are only two fundamental truths in this situation. It's individual discipline and it's government enforcement.
Yes. Dictatorship?
Yeah, I think so. He's really getting his Benito on there in New York. Let's look at the office of the governor here. This is the decrees coming down from their office here. Governor Cuomo announces restaurants, bars, and other organizations and businesses and licenses entities must close by 10 p.m. So 10 p.m. curfew. So again, Covey or Caroni, he's not active from 10 p.m. till 5 a.m., but he is active in the other hours there. So they're shutting that all down. This is what they're saying. The governor also announced that indoor and outdoor gatherings at private residences, homes, will be limited to no more than 10 people. The limit will be implemented due to the recent prevalence of COVID spread resulting from small indoor gatherings, including Halloween parties. Speaking of Halloween, there he is. And these gatherings have become a major cause of cluster activity across the state. Where's the actual scientific proof for that? I have not seen any. This is just all speculation and massive guesswork. They were kind of saying the same things, or hinting here, the government was.
Yes, exactly the same things.
Yeah. So we'll just go on here. This is also streamlining with the surrounding states. Further, this public health measure brings New York State in line with neighboring states, including Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. So it goes into effect today, later on today. So there's that's the shape of things right now. Of course, New York being most populous, most powerful state on the eastern seaboard, they're going to basically, they're going to set the agenda for the rest of the East Coast, but not necessarily in the Midwest. So you'll see Democratic-run states, lockdowns, heavy measures. Republican-run states, more relaxed, more sort of taking a sensible, I would say a sensible approach. That's not a partisan statement, because if you look at the records in terms of death counts and all of these metrics that people use to chart success, the non-lockdown states, again, totally more successful and lower fatalities, and actually probably happier population than the Democratic-run, heavy-handed lockdown states.
I mean, from the beginning, this Cuomo has been the man who's pretty much run the same type of model as the UK and Europe.
Yeah.
And the results in New York City in particular have been absolutely stark. That is, people have left the city, the shops, the restaurants, everything's closed. The city is dead, right? And nobody's actually going into their offices in the city. This is the model that clearly Biden then wants to roll out for the whole of the United States.
Yeah, government enforcement and discipline. This is what's needed. So now one of the Supreme Court justices, he's a conservative justice, Samuel Alito, has weighed in. We're going to play a segment from the Federalist Society where he spoke yesterday at a constitutional event. And so this is the first time that a major justice, I know this has happened already in the UK, which we'll hear from Lord Sumption in a minute, but in the US, we haven't had a major jurist come out and make such strong statements on COVID policy. So let's just listen to this.
The COVID restrictions have highlighted the movement toward rule by experts. Litigation about those restrictions has pointed up emerging trends in the assessment of individual rights. We have never before seen restrictions as severe, extensive, and prolonged as those experienced for most of 2020. The COVID crisis has served as a sort of constitutional stress test, and in doing so, it has highlighted disturbing trends that were already present before the virus struck.
So, I mean, does some of that sounds familiar? Because
yes,
we've already heard, some of the great legal minds in this country already talking about that. But what's really important is this has become totally politicized, this issue. It shouldn't be politicized. If you just go by the letter of the law in the U.S., it's the Constitution, then it shouldn't be politicized at all. It's a really straightforward case that a constitutional argument would be on the side of human rights, on the side of the individual, not impinging on their rights. and not sort of playing winners and losers with businesses and things like this.
Yes, but what we're seeing in the United States, in the UK, in parts of Europe, is a transformation of government from what it was into something else. Now, we have given ideas to everybody about what we're being transformed into, but it's never been clearly stated what that is. But that transformation, constitutions are inconvenient for that type of transformation. They've got to be undermined. They've got to be infringed.
Very much so.
Yes.
And so let's hear, now this is interesting, Justice Alito's comments streamline very well, dovetail very well with Lord Justice Sumption. And this is from just a few weeks ago here in a podcast with, I believe, Alison Pearson from The Telegraph, who's been very active on this issue. Here's Lord Sumption. We'll play this clip.
Well, the most important thing about the Coronavirus Act is that it's not the act which has been used to justify the lockdown or other measures affecting citizens. There are no powers in the coronavirus bill to control the movements of healthy people. The government has in fact used the Coronavirus Act only to justify the financial implications of the lockdown. Most of the Act is in fact concerned with authorising, with the minimum of parliamentary scrutiny, additional public expenditure. I do not myself believe that that Act confers on the government the powers which it has purported to exercise, because it is a basic principle of British constitutional law that you cannot invade fundamental rights, and there are few more fundamental rights than liberty, by using general terms. You've got to be specific about it. And the reason for that is that if you use general words to justify draconian invasions of fundamental rights, there's too big a risk that it will pass unnoticed in the course of the parliamentary process. To invade fundamental rights, you have to have absolutely specific language. The only specific language in the Public Health Act which justifies invasions of liberty relates to people who are believed on reasonable grounds to be infectious. Ministers can only do things that magistrates could do, and magistrates only have power to control the movements of infected people or to control the opening of infected premises. They don't have power to control uncontaminated premises or healthy people.
So that's absolutely clear, Patrick, because what he's saying there is that government is taking upon itself powers which it doesn't actually have. Now, this is very interesting timing because Alex Thompson, David Scott and I have just completed the latest episode of the Dissident's Guide to the Constitution, and that will be published over the weekend. And this is exactly one of the areas that we are discussing in that podcast. And I think, if I remember rightly, Sumption went on then to talk about the Civil Contingencies Act. And the question is, why is the government not using the Civil Contingencies Act? Why did it need to bring some new legislation in? And they're not declaring a national emergency, which is what they would have to do to implement or to impose the Civil Contingencies Act. And the reason is that as bad as the Civil Contingencies Act is in terms of the level of draconian powers that the government can take upon itself as a result of that act, it puts limitations on government behaviour. They don't want to bring the Civil Contingencies Act online because of those limitations, so they've brought new legislation in which completely subverts the limitations that are there constitutionally and subverts the limitations which Parliament thought were good to have in the Civil Contingencies Act as well.
So it's just an end run around parliamentary democracy,
yes,
and constitutional law.
100%.
That's all it is.
Yes.
So it's a trick at the end of the day. So he made a really fundamental common law argument there. He's saying that governments can't have any more power than magistrates, for instance. And so by leaving it vague under the Public Health or Coronavirus Act rather than in terms of civil contingencies, by being vague about it, they don't have to specify anything. So you throw in the asymptomatics and quarantining healthy people and testing healthy people, and you couldn't get that wouldn't stand up in a court of law. So it's an end run around the justice system. You could look at it that way, couldn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, okay. Well, look, we'll move on, and we'll just say that if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, and there are options to help us out there. That'd be very much appreciated. What's the latest on the US election then, Patrick?
Well, back to the U.S. election, and there it is. And we thought it was all over. Well, the question is it all over? That's the big question. So there's been a lot of talk about election fraud. There's challenges coming from the incumbent Donald Trump, the White House. So this is what the mainstream media is pushing out right now. Here we go. The Department of Homeland Security breaks from Trump and his baseless claims of election fraud, calling this year's presidential race the most secure in American history. And so you back this up with the New York Times also saying that election officials across the country has said that they find no evidence of any fraud or whatever. So you can see the argument that's being made that there's been this push by the civil service, by the mainstream media, by all the usual suspects that there's no problems, nothing to see. Meanwhile, the evidence is absolutely mounting up. There's cases being filed in multiple states. They've got hundreds of pages of affidavits. They've got testimony. They've got physical evidence as well. Let's just take a look at just a couple of the things that are moving right now in the courts. So contrary to what the mainstream media is claiming, 2020 election fraud, yes, there are real cases here. Now, this is big. A Pennsylvania court, Secretary of State, lacks authority to change the deadline 2 days before Election Day. So this is really foreshadowing a potential decision by the Supreme Court here to basically push back that sort of deadline extension that came and was rushed through.
What was massively interesting about this story was that the mainstream press was downplaying it as much as they possibly could. It only affects 2,000 votes, is what they were saying, and they weren't engaging on the point that you've just made, the implications for Supreme Court.
Sure. Yeah. And so it affects more than 2,000 votes, by the way. Okay. And so that potentially you could see something like this could flip Pennsylvania. Okay. Now let's look at what else is going on. What other states could be potentially flipped? Let's take a look here. Rudy Giuliani, the president's attorney, has revealed evidence of election fraud in cases in Michigan and Pennsylvania, and also Nevada as well. So he's being forced to go to alternative media outlets because the press will not cover any of these stories. So these legal cases and challenges, they don't want to know. They've been completely frozen out of the press. The only outlet I think that is giving any airtime is Fox News, but then only a little bit because they've kind of turned against the president. So people like Giuliani are going to Newsmax or more alternative outlets like Just the News, John Solomon's new news outlet. So, but the evidence is quite striking. And if there's a motion to discovery, then all of this is going to be basically considered by judges, and we could see legal action moving forward by next week. And so in terms of timing, there's plenty of time to affect the process because the Electoral College doesn't meet until the second week of December, and then the states have to certify each of these elections. There is no winner yet. This is the thing, and this is why we're seeing this rush by the Obama, Freudian slip there, the Biden president-elect office, this new thing he's created, to make him the winner, to basically say he's the winner.
And the media.
And to create a consensus. So in terms of election fraud, look at this one. This is stunning here. This is Iowa. Republican House candidate pulls ahead in Iowa after an audit of ballots uncovers an error. So when you go to audit the ballots by hand and not feeding them through the machines at 4 a.m., you have something like this. This is huge. If this seat turns for the Republicans, they're looking at potentially 12, maybe 13 seats in the House gain on the Democrats. This means that the Democratic majority is becoming thinner and thinner by the day. So this is the opposite of what we were told in the run-up to the election and even during the election in terms of what the Republican performance is going to be. If they do ballot audits in all of these states that the White House is challenging, you could potentially see a couple of states flip back to Donald Trump, then all of a sudden the narrative is completely reversed.
And did I see that Georgia has started hand counting?
There is an order for a mandatory hand recount, I believe, in Georgia. They've also got 2 Senate runoffs elections that are going to happen as well. And so that's really important in terms of if the Republicans are going to maintain control of the Senate. But there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on that Senate runoff than there was on election night on November 3rd. So that probably bodes well for the Republicans. But again, Georgia could flip back to Donald Trump if they go in, and any of these cases that have been filed in Georgia for election fraud as well, if that throws out a certain number of ballots, and military ballots are coming in to be counted on November 21st, Georgia could flip. If Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan flip, or Arizona flips, 3 of those 6 states that are up in the air right now, then Donald Trump is going to be sworn in on January 20th. So, I mean, it's funny that they've really pushed this Biden wand so much energy. Foreign leaders are endorsing him, and he's getting his cabinet together. And by the way, this is the same thing that the Bush administration did in 2000. They were very savvy. They appointed their cabinet, made it a diverse cabinet with Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell. And that really, that placated the media so much. And then when the bad news came for Al Gore, it really deflated the fight in the Democrats. By the way, Al Gore was given 37 days to challenge one single state, the state of Florida, in 2000. And he was allowed to do that. That was seen as due process. But now, because Donald Trump is challenging some of these states, they're calling it a coup, that he's trying to seize power. This is a fascist takeover by the White House. I mean, the level of lying and dishonesty and partisan hackery in the media is just too much. It really is too much. And I think it's destroying political discourse. If it wasn't already destroyed, the media and partisans who have no respect at all for due process or the rule of law, they're really destroying political discourse in the United States, not Donald Trump. Yeah. Donald Trump's doing exactly what Al Gore did in 2000. So how's this going to affect Britain, Mike? That's the question. How's this going to affect Britain? If there's a Biden presidency, well, what does that mean for the UK?
It means big trouble.
Big trouble. What could be coming down the pipeline? We'll take a look at this. Joe Biden tipped to appoint, guess who? Barack Obama as ambassador to the UK. And a very awkward move for Boris, says the Express. Newspapers.
Now, the Queen will love it because she loves Barack Obama, but I have never, ever heard of a former US president becoming an ambassador to any other country. Surely, well, I mean, once you're president, that is as high as you can go, and it is pretty unusual to see somebody taking a step down like this.
No, it's completely unprecedented. I'm sure it might have happened once or something in history, but I can see when they get older, could be kind of a swan song appointment, post 70, something like that, nice and relaxed, go shopping at Harvey Nichols on the weekend with the wife, break a few champagne bottles over some ships or whatever. But this is totally unprecedented. At his age and at his sort of position of power in U.S. politics, this is a totally politicized appointment by the United States. So you have to ask yourself the question, why would they send Barack Obama to the UK? That's the question. And this is what you can expect. Let's take a look at this. So if Obama becomes ambassador to the UK, special relationship is going to change slightly here. Ambassador Obama, this is what you're going to get. Firstly, his task, his mission will be to push the UK back towards Brussels. Make no mistake about it. He opposed Brexit publicly, one of the only leaders to do that, I think. Well, certainly that was, unusual for the special relationship. So pushing the UK back into the EU, that will be a major goal. And to sabotage the EU withdrawal agreement, whatever's left of it, he will be involved in that. He's actually already making comments along those lines with regards to the Irish situation, the Good Friday Agreement, and so forth. So if things aren't already difficult for for the government or for Boris Johnson, Obama will make sure they're even more difficult when he's over here decamped in London to stir up social justice and BLM protests in the UK. If you look at Obama's career, his history as a community organizer, he is a master political agitator. But now he's got this incredible platform and a global platform. He's regarded as kind of a hero for persons of color globally. He will use that platform like he has done in the United States, like his wife has done, to basically gin up the mobs, basically. We saw what happened over the past couple of months and also throughout his presidency. So why would you do that, Mike? Why would you, what's the advantage to doing that if you could throw a word in here or a prompt in here in the UK, that puts pressure on the government. So again, this is the political business model of Obama and other people like him on this end of the left wing of the spectrum. And here's the big part here, Mike. He's going to be pushing the climate change and Green New Deal agenda. Make no mistake about it. And what comes with that acceleration of UK adoption of the Great Reset agenda. He is Davos's ambassador in London, and he will make sure by commanding the climate change protesters, Greta Thunberg, Extinction Rebellion, that the Davos agenda will be fast-tracked in the UK. So if Boris is waffling or the Brexiteer in the British heartlands or clamoring or restless, Obama will be there to keep Boris Johnson's government on course. And if there happens to be another government while he's here as his tenure, he'll be right in there if it's, God forbid, or whatever, a Labour government makes it into power. Obama will be there to shepherd them along the Davos World Economic Forum agenda.
Yes. Okay, well, let's move on to this then, because mainstream press, lots of them asking this question: what happens if Trump refuses to concede US election? Now Biden has won. So Biden has won again. We've got the press here stating that as a fact.
They're all saying it.
Yes, and this article says, in The Independent, says Donald Trump falsely declared victory on the night of the election and vowed to go to the Supreme Court to stop vote counting, confirming some Americans' worst fears that he would undermine the democratic process. This is the position that they're taking. Now Joe Biden has won the US election. What happens if the president refuses to leave the White House? And this is a very interesting question, Patrick, because we have Newsweek here from the 11th of June saying if Donald Trump refuses to leave the White House, Secret Service will escort him out. And because this is a narrative, this isn't a new narrative, this is one that has been developing over a period of months from well before the election. The suggestion that Donald Trump would be in a position where he would refuse to leave the White House. Here is Reuters. Pelosi says Trump will be fumigated out if he refuses to leave the White House after a loss. And that was from October, I think. Now, Pelosi had been in conversations with the military about military intervention if Trump had decided to refuse to leave the White House for any reason. But she wasn't happy to leave it with the military because this was in The Guardian a few weeks ago. Congress will discuss rules for Trump's removal under the 25th Amendment. So they were looking for any possible way to get him out. But my point here is that the narrative was being established from months ago that a scenario would be in existence after the election where Trump would be refusing to leave. And I'm just fascinated that they knew that would be a scenario that they would that would be playing out at this point.
Oh, they knew the result would be what the pollsters were saying: Biden up by 14, Biden up by 17 all summer. So that was that was absolutely part of the gag. Was you have all the mainstream pollsters and the mainstream media inflating this great Biden lead, and this is to sort of condition the public to think that he was the odds-on overwhelming favorite, and that any other close result is just a fluke, and he's the rightful president. He's already been declared president by the media. Newsflash for the British press: the media doesn't declare the president in the United States. You don't elect the president. The mainstream corporate media doesn't. The people elect the president. Their representatives in Congress elect the president, and they haven't certified the election yet, and they haven't sent electors yet to the Electoral College to vote yet. So you can't call the election. It means nothing. Okay? And it didn't mean anything for Bush and Gore in 2000 either. But for some reason, we're supposed to not see history and precedent, and this is a new thing. Look, the last thing I'm going to say is they're going to accelerate with this, Mike. It's not just when is Donald Trump going to leave the White House on January 19th. They want to remove him before inauguration, and hence invoke the 25th Amendment, say he's mentally not fit, etc. So they want to get him out. They want to press him to total humiliation and repudiate his whole presidency, almost expunge or erase it. This is like the procession of kings or Soviet regimes. I mean, it's unbelievable how bloodthirsty the Democrats are on this, but we shall see. We shall see.
Well, another king who has been deposed now seems to be Dominic Cummings. Now,
the hand of the king.
The hand of the king, yeah. Lots and lots of questions about this, of course, because there seems to be all kinds of civil war going on within the Boris Johnson regime, as we can call it. But this is Robert Peston on ITV's website saying why Boris Johnson had to let Dominic Cummings go. And he's saying, last July, I wrote that the government of Boris Johnson was being taken over by Dominic Cummings and his Vote Leave team. That was not hyperbole. Since then, both the reality of Cummings and the myths about him have defined Johnson's first 16 months as PM, which is why, as one Downing Street insider put it to me, Cummings' departure feels like a fire has raged through the building. For all the controversy stirred up by Cummings, or perhaps because of it to an extent, Johnson owes a substantial debt to the eccentric special advisor who organised the referendum campaign for leaving the EU. So, well, Cummings had said in his blog post in January, the famous blog post where he was talking about weirdos and so on going into government, he had said that he was planning on trying to make his role largely redundant by the end of the year. Now, the timing of that perhaps was related to the transition agreement, the transition period with the EU being complete, and a future relationship with the EU being complete. So I think it's perhaps in that context we've got to look at this, because Barnier is still in this country. He's still in the UK at the moment, running negotiations with the EU for the future relationship. Because if you remember, the Brexit was a divorce, and then how much of it do we go back into afterwards? And that's the question. Now, if Cummings is out of the way, then perhaps we will be back into more than otherwise. It's very hard to call this one, but look, let's just remind ourselves what the EU deal, the future partnership, was all about. First of all, it was all about a level playing field with respect to trade. And in order to maintain that level playing field, if you remember, the full body of EU law and regulations has been put on the UK statute books. But this is all we ever hear about in the UK media, is the level playing field and the trade agreement, the free trade agreement, and what the implications are for freedom of movement between the UK and the EU, what kind of tariffs are going to be in place, the possibility of huge queues of trucks in Kent on the 1st of January because the customs arrangements haven't been put in place. That is 100% of the focus of the UK media. But there's a whole other aspect to this, as we've highlighted on this programme before, and that's the security partnership. And as far as the EU is concerned, that's 50% of this deal. And the UK is very interested in this security partnership as well. And so foreign security and defence policy is all a key part of it. Now, if you look down through that list, strategic dialogue, sanctions, participation in EU-led operations and missions, defence capabilities, intelligence exchanges, space and development. Well, these are all the types of areas that are part and parcel of EU defence. So I just want to, just a little aside here, I just want to mention this. This is Rusty Furman's YouTube channel, and a couple of weeks ago he interviewed Nigel Farage. Do go and watch that interview if you haven't seen it already. Look for Rusty Furman SAS TV on YouTube. Now, of course, Rusty Furman, if you don't know, was one of the SAS personnel that entered the Iranian embassy during the siege back in the 80s. Now, this is what Nigel Farage had to say during that interview. I'm pretty sure that if Trump wins re-election, EU defence union will become a bigger issue. And this was quite a fascinating statement, because this was made the day before he went off to the United States to go and take part in the pre-election arrangements. He spoke at one of the Trump rallies, for example. And so this was the day before he flew off to spend some time with Donald Trump. So it was quite surprising, perhaps, or maybe not, that because the implication of what Farage said was that Trump was going to do something about EU defence union. Well, what was he going to do? Was he against it? Was he for it? I think maybe we get a clue now, because here's Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, from a day or two ago. The US welcomes, he was speaking to Fox, if I'm right.
This was a general, yeah, I was speaking to a reporter, but it was a press conference.
Okay. So the US welcomes the EU's guidelines for third state participation in permanent structured cooperation projects. He said opening the door to US participation in EU defence initiatives will strengthen NATO-EU cooperation as well, and very importantly, interoperability. And he said, we look forward to completing an administrative arrangement with the European Defence Agency to ensure broad US participation inside PESCO. So quite contrary to the suggestion by Nigel Farage that the US administration would be against EU defence union. In fact, it looks like they want to get right in there. So let's just quickly remind everybody what PESCO is, in case you don't know. This, of course, one of the pillars of the EU defence union. And it's had quite a history, quite a development process. Let's just quickly run through this. So starting in 2015, the European Political Strategy Centre published a white paper on military unification, and they were talking about the Lisbon Treaty. And this was something which was provided in the Lisbon Treaty, this idea of permanent structured cooperation, that it could become a game changer for European security by enabling willing member states to move forward. Then the main action happened in 2017 when the European Council called for a launch of permanent structured cooperation in June of that year. And then in September, the UK government published a Foreign Policy, Defence and Development Brexit white paper, in which they said that the UK will continue its contribution to the common security and defence policy missions and operations if it could participate in both the mandate, development and detailed operational planning stages of PESCO. So at that point, they were very interested in PESCO. In September, in November, then the EU military was established with the signing of the joint notification on PESCO. And if you remember, if you were watching the UK column at that time, you'd have seen Federica Mogherini extremely excited about this. 23 nations joined. The UK didn't sign, but it was possible at that time for the UK and other member states to join at a later stage. And then in December, the House of Commons Library published a PESCO briefing paper in which he said that the UK government did not sign the joint notification on the 13th of November. As such, it will remain outside of PESCO. In doing so, the UK will have no decision-making rights over PESCO governance or any veto over the future strategic direction of PESCO, which has been openly acknowledged as greater EU integration in the field of defence. And then on the 11th of December, the European Council established the permanent structured cooperation. Now, at present, the UK is not part of this, but it is part of the negotiations on the future agreement with the future partnership with the EU. And it's clear that the US also wants to get involved. So there are massive implications for NATO in this. But just to let people understand the scope of it, this is, I realize nobody's going to be able to see that because it's way too small. There's 47 PESCO projects. We'll put the link to the PESCO projects list in the video description on the UK column website and also on YouTube shortly after the program. And you'll get to see this list of 47 projects. But you'll see that they're in the same types of policy areas as were listed in the Defence and Security section on the template for the future agreement between the UK and the EU. And just to put this into a slightly different context, this is the EU's diagram for what makes up European Defence Union, 8 pillars, NATO at one end, bilateral, multilateral cooperation at the other end. PESCO, absolutely a key pillar of this. If you want to get more on the background to this, do have a look at the UK column section on European Defence, EU Defence Union, European Defence Union. You can get to that by just going to ukcolumn.org/defence. And also, if you have been watching David Ellis's series of reports, his David Ellis report programs, he has been covering quite a bit of this in recent weeks. Another one went out yesterday. I strongly recommend everybody watches that and listens very, very carefully to what General Sir Richard Barrons was telling David Ellis yesterday. So let's just move on then quickly, Patrick, to this, because we're nearly out of time. We mentioned this on Wednesday, the Green Horizon Conference that's being hosted or was hosted by the City of London. It finished on Wednesday afternoon. And if you remember, it's time to reset the relationship between finance and the real economy. This is all about the Green New Deal. You were talking about this if Obama becomes the ambassador, thank you, to the UK. This is absolutely being driven forward as hard as it can by the World Economic Forum and the usual suspects, including Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor. This is what he said. If you remember from Wednesday's programme, we'll not get to net zero in a niche. It requires a whole economy transition. Well, towards the end of the conference then, Michael Hayes, we didn't get to report this on Wednesday because it hadn't happened yet, but Michael Hayes, the head of KPMG, had this to say: COVID-19 has been nothing more than a dress rehearsal for climate change. So what's he talking about? He's talking about the economic impacts of the lockdowns, of the policies that are being pushed forward by as a result of COVID-19 are nothing more than a dress rehearsal for climate change. So in other words, we ain't seen nothing yet. And he was saying to everybody at that conference, it's time to get a move on. We need to press forward with this as fast as we can. So there were two reports which were included in the conference. This was one of them, the Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets. This was produced, well, who was the key front man on this? Well, it was none other than Mark Carney himself. It also involved the Institute for International Finance, McKinsey Management and Bloomberg Philanthropies. And it's all about encouraging companies to get involved in green markets, which have to increase. The size of the green markets have to increase, according to this report, by 15 times by 2030. So within 10 years, we need to see a 15 times increase in the size of carbon markets. Okay, and the second report, just before you comment on this, Patrick, the second report was this: building a private finance system for net zero. And I wonder who was fronting this report. Well, it was Mark Carney. He, of course, is UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance. And he's also Boris Johnson's finance advisor for COP26. So this was leading into COP26, which was supposed to be taking place, I think, this month. But it was being put back in Glasgow, but it's been put back by a year in order to perhaps allow a real conference to take place rather than a virtual conference. But nonetheless, the preparations for COP26 moving ahead, COVID-19 is nothing compared to what's coming with that.
So what can you envision? Are going to have lockdowns because to cut down carbon emissions, or to give the Earth a rest? Let's take a breather. Let's lock down for 6 months. What do you think?
That narrative is already across the mainstream press. Absolutely, we need to encourage people who really enjoyed the ecological effects of lockdown. We want them to enjoy more of that. But the intention here is a wholesale transformation of the economies, of the types of businesses that we're running. There's going to be some pretty significant pain for people because, of course, we've been told by the British government we've all got to go and retrain.
So Carney's comments previously were that businesses that don't comply with the new carbon orthodoxy are going to be punished, right?
Bankrupted and, yes, punished on one statement, bankrupted in another. This is a narrative he has repeated time after time. So
what would be the easiest way to crush and to punish any of these remaining straggling anathema businesses and enterprises? Well,
of course, if you don't allow them to open for business, then they're out of business.
Lockdown.
So
this is just a culling effect. This is like what they would call economic or new green Darwinism. So if you're not on board with the agenda, you'll be crushed. And we'll do it manually through lockdowns. To make a market 15 times bigger, what's that going to take? Well, that shouldn't be very easy. That shouldn't be very difficult, Mike, because what do these financiers like Mark Carney and this breed of elites, what do they specialize in? Well, they specialize in leveraging things out of thin air. No problem. A green bond market, green derivatives, I think we can achieve that 15x growth model. I think we can do that probably in a couple of years with these geniuses at the helm. They'll just create another green bubble that'll be inflated bigger than anything anybody's ever seen. And who cares if it pops? You know, who cares if anything pops anymore? You can just print more or whatever it is.
And of course, you are changing the relationship between finance and the real economy if in the process there is no real economy anymore. And
That's right.
that's where we're going. Universal basic income is on its way. And we will leave it there for today. So thank you very much, Patrick, for joining us today. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time as usual, 1 p.m. on Monday. Hope you have a great weekend. In the meantime, we'll see you then. Bye-bye.